About 100 years ago, I was the backup quarterback for the George Washington Junior High School in Newcastle, Pennsylvania, in addition to playing another position on the team. The starting quarterback, a guy named Leonard, eventually went on to lead our high school to the 6A Western Pennsylvania Interscholastic Athletic League Football Championship. A prestigious achievement, at least in those days, and I imagine still today. But in one of those junior high games, our lead was so commanding before the end of the first half that the coach took a chance and put me in at quarterback to give me some experience in this position. Well, I fumbled the first snap from the center, which was recovered by the opposing team. Now, the trip back to the sidelines was one of the longest trips I had ever taken in my life. As my coach told me, if I was to play the quarterback position again, he had to be able to trust me to not fumble the snap. His words were more colorful than that. So for the entire halftime, I practiced taking the snap from our center named Wolfgang. When the second half rolled around, the coach put me back in at quarterback, but he also put the starting quarterback, Leonard, in as a running back, probably just to stabilize the huddle. But I remember just about every play I called was a handoff to the gifted athlete, Leonard, who would sweep around the end and invariably gain about 10 to 12 yards each carry. The play was numbered, as I recall, 520. So when we got back to that huddle, I would call 520, then again 520, then again 520. You couldn't argue with success. And at one point, Leonard came back to the huddle and said to me, "When are you going to give me a break, man?" But the point of the story is that was the day that I had one of my first encounters with resiliency. Every time that Leonard took the handoff from me, he would jet around the end, he would lower his helmet into would-be tacklers, and he would fall forward for one first down after another. He was the toughest guy on the field and as resilient as they come. From a poor family, from the west side of town, this young man didn't know the meaning of mediocrity, only the meaning of tenacity. To me, at that point in my life, it was resilience revealed. Now, when we consider any kind of revelation, it usually comes from within. We speak from our own experiences and from our own vantage points. Reinhold Niebuhr, H.R. Niebuhr, the brother of Reinhold Niebuhr, in his book, The Meaning of Revelation, says that all of us speak from personal experiences, mixed with emotion, inner feeling, and revelation. My definition of resilience, for instance, may be different from yours, based on our own personal experiences, just as any value or ideal that we hold close to our hearts. So we look at this word, resilience, from a particular understanding of it. Now, resilience is not normally a term associated with the Christmas story. We hear more about hope and joy and peace and love this time of the year. But when you consider the circumstances of Jesus' birth, every main character was resilient, especially Jesus' parents, Mary and Joseph. Beginning with Mary, she was a peasant girl from a small town who probably had to endure the gossip in her community of being with child during her betrothal period, which in Hebrew custom was between engagement and marriage. You can imagine the bewilderment of the community when she tries to explain what was going on. Rumors are probably flying all over the place, and perhaps that's why she left her home in Nazareth to confide in her kinswoman Elizabeth in the city of Judea. So probably for about 3 months or so, Mary stayed out of sight and out of touch with the locals of her hometown, Nazareth. It had to have been a particularly lonely and stressful time. But Mary was resilient enough to endure and to follow through with the magnitude and the greatness of her calling. Joseph, was a pious Israelite who faithfully observed Jewish ordinances, was a hard-working carpenter. When delivered the news that his betrothed Mary was with child, he took her to Bethlehem for census, perhaps too, to spare her from the insults of her gossiping neighbors. In addition, they took the arduous 90-mile journey from Nazareth to Bethlehem over very difficult terrain, which would have normally taken about 4 to 5 days. So here you have a couple, a carpenter from Nazareth, a peasant girl, who received the news that they would be the parents of the Savior of the world, but whose set of circumstances probably ostracized them from their community, and who were left with little choice but to take the trip to Bethlehem with only a stable promised to give them the birth of the Messiah. And then afterwards, they were forced to pack up everything and flee to Egypt to escape the threat of King Herod and his order to eliminate all the infants in the area. In their mission, Joseph and Mary's, and in their escape, there is little doubt as to the resiliency of Jesus' parents. Then would come the resiliency of Jesus himself, with his ability to endure the threats and the insults of his 3-year ministry. His personal physical endurance, covering the amount of territory he did in a short period of time. The pain and the agony of betrayals and denials from his closest friends. Probably no better evidence of the example of resilience anywhere. And with true resilience, we know, comes faith. And with faith comes confidence in the future. Paul said in Romans, suffering produces endurance, endurance produces character, character produces hope, and hope doesn't disappoint. So when we consider the message of Bethlehem, it'd be hard to overlook the role that resilience played in its outcome. But when one examines this word, I feel the temptation is to oversimplify, overuse, and diminish its true meaning. Showing up for work with a headache and a cold hardly constitutes resilience, as does working 10 or 12 hours a day, or bouncing back from a poor performance on a test or on a job. It's just part of life. Doesn't really necessarily mean that you're resilient. The American Psychological Association's definition sets a much higher bar in its own definition of resilience. It says, adapting well in the face of adversity, in the face of trauma, in the face of tragedy, in the face of threats, or in the face of significant sources of stress. That's resilience. Interestingly enough, a study by psychologists Victor and Mildred Gertzel, I read this recently in the Wall Street Journal, found that less than 15% of the famous men and women they studied had been raised in supportive and untroubled homes. Less than 15%. But 75% of them had grown up in a family burdened by a severe problem. Poverty, abuse, absent parents, alcoholism, serious illness, or some other misfortune. In other words, struggle and neglect came first, resilience came next, success followed. For instance, basketball player LeBron James was raised in poverty in Akron, Ohio. And during his 4th grade year, as an example, he moved at least a half dozen times. Imagine that in 4th grade, moving at least a half dozen times. And he missed nearly 100 days of school. He never met his father because his father was in prison. He would sleep on a couch in a 1-bedroom apartment that belonged to one of his mother's friends, where parties continued late in the night, and police were often summoned to the home for trouble. LeBron James was a lost Akron child whose resilience would later overcome daunting odds. Hemingway's words come to mind: "A man can be destroyed, but never defeated." We know that the list of incredible stories of resilience go on, none the least of which is in Winston Churchill when he delivered his famous speech. Maybe you've heard this before, against the Nazi war machine: "We shall fight on the seas and the oceans. We shall defend our island. We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall fight in the fields, in the streets, and we should fight in the hills." Nothing detained Nelson Mandela, even after serving 27 years in prison at Robben Island, for his opposition to South African apartheid. His resilience helped reform the country. In an age where few women were educated in the late 18th and 19th centuries, Marie Curie became one of the most important scientists of her generation. Her discoveries enabled the development of modern radiation and X-ray. Resilience. Thomas Edison was fired from his job when a chemical experiment leaked acid on his boss's desk. Despite being almost penniless, Edison, as we know, became the most prolific inventor of his generation. Resilience. In stories of religious faith, we see resilience in the likes of a 16th century William Tyndale, who translated the Bible into English, and later Tyndale, for his supposed heresy, would be burned at the stake. That's resilience. The English Christian reformer William Wilberforce endured ridicule, insults, and would not give up until he convinced Parliament to outlaw slavery in Britain through the Slavery Abolition Act of 1833. Resilience. Mother Teresa's resilient faith that God resided in all human beings, from the lowest street beggar to someone dying in obscurity. Resilience. We talked before about the German Lutheran pastor Bonhoeffer and his resiliency of character to defy Hitler and to protest the acquiescence of his own church to the evil Nazi empire. One of the main threads that connect all these people together is the thread of resilience. As I alluded to before, resilience is not revealed in the things we're supposed to be doing as a matter of course, like going beyond the call of duty. We're supposed to be doing that. Or not giving up the attempt to bounce back from defeat or disappointment. We're supposed to be doing that. But resilience is revealed in the extraordinary things that come in the most unexpected ways and at the most unexpected times. Joseph and Mary fulfilling their prophecy of the coming of the Messiah by performing incredible things to complete their mission in Bethlehem. Or John the Baptist letting nothing stand in his way to successfully prophesy the coming of the Lord, his life ending with a beheading in a lonely Roman prison cell. In a world of hypocrisy and cruelty and slavery and materialism, Jesus' resilience resisted the temptations of power and prominence, but instead chose the path of truth and offered the world a message of salvation. The message of the miraculous birth at Bethlehem has many meanings for many different people, but the main character, Jesus himself, represented the truest meaning of resilience. Uncompromised character, courage, faith, sacrifice, unconditional love. It was resilience defined. So my friends, next time you and I consider this word, remember the incredible efforts of Mary and Joseph and their son Jesus, who we celebrate this Christmas season.